Well, if you look at this, you ask the basic question, okay? The English in 1847 decided to go out and kill off the Welsh language. And you then ask the answer, well, did they succeed? And certainly by 100 years after them, in the 1950s, you probably argue that he did. And that's what it was, is a real stroke of genius. The Welsh fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, for all the right reasons. Yeah. We come back down to the triad of real things, which is, fear of revolution. If you read on the first one there, all the meetings held during the Chartist outbreak were carried out in Welsh, so they couldn't be discovered by the police and the other agencies in the government, the discovery and counteraction of the revolutionary plot. Yeah. And then the next two then are all about compliant and educated workforce. As a master of about 1,200 work people, he was a big iron master. It's next to impossible to reason or talk with them.
It wasn't so tragic. It is quite funny, really.
And then the final bit of the triad is restoring the reputation of the courts, because perjury was so common and nobody could understand what was going on. And they say is that the witnesses didn't understand. If they understood English, they feigned not to. The big beef that they all had was, but because the jurors were Welsh,
they back them up anyway.
They were never going to get a prosecution anyway, no matter what. It was quite simply because the Welsh saw it quite rightly as the Welsh against the English. It was just like, and you English have got a stacked deck here, so we're just fighting back. Parliament had set out beforehand when they sent all these 3 commissioners out to look at it. They'd already decided, we are going to euthanize Welsh, the Welsh language. And we're going to dress it up as a benevolent act by disguising it as education. That was the plot. They come back, they got all the ammunition, and they put it to Parliament, and it went on. It then all followed. The report was published, but as soon as the report was published, there was a huge backlash. And this is Robert Jones Derville come up with the treachery of the blue books. Mm-hmm. There were lots of satirical writings at the time attacking the reports and things like the tabloids were playing up all of the salacious items in there and stoking up the Furno. And this play that he wrote, the treachery of the blue books, the play opens in hell, where the devil decides that the Welsh people are too good and too godly, and they're becoming godlier by the moment. So the devil decides that the Welsh people need bringing to line. So promptly hatches a devious plan to bring the pure and the godly people down, and that plan was, the Education Acts that come in after them. So the whole play is a satirical. What's the right word to use? Satirical dialogue on the Welsh thing itself, and highlighting all those things, and actually basically, so extracting the urine out of the English establishment, basically, for what they were doing. One of the other backlash effects, 1865, Michael Jones set up a Welsh community in Patagonia.
That's when that came around, okay.
Yeah, because he recognized the increasing detrimental impact that mainstream English politics and culture were having on the homeland. So that's why he decided to pack up his bags at that. And it's part of the backlash and part of what came out of the blue books itself. The commissioners, at the end of the day, and if you read all the stats and things like that, you've got to come up. It's quite clear. Education was totally inadequate. in Wales. It was, you know, there was no doubt about it. They didn't have books. They didn't have any. All the schools were poor. They were all in private homes. A lot of them. They were, you know, they were in dire.
We're talking about facilities, though, rather than education. It sounds like they were actually still learning. They were still learning how to read. They were still learning their maths. They were still. This is pointless because there's no outlets anyway. This is the problem, isn't it? What's the point of becoming an expert, I don't know, law or something, if you can't practice?
Well, that was one of the big shocks the commissioners got, was that in Welsh, you know, it worked. They can read and write in Welsh. The Sunday schools, the non-conformist Sunday schools, were spectacularly successful, and even include, you know, they included adults as well. So it wasn't just children that were getting educated; it was children and adults.
Yes, it's not a poor education; it's the fact they're not learning what they want them to learn, isn't it?
The fact that it wasn't learning English. But again, I come back down to the empire aspect of this. When we went into India, did we conduct business over there in India?
The same thing there, yeah.
We did exactly the same thing. The next part of the backlash then comes quite later on with Saunders Lewis and one of the founders of Plaid Cymru in the 20s. I mean, this thing, so we all know what happened after the treachery of the Blue Books. That whole series of education acts got passed.
Well, the big one, I don't know, sorry to jump in, but the biggest thing that happened was that they got rid of all they replaced all the teachers with English-speaking teachers.
Yeah, they replaced all the teachers. There's a whole series of acts doing that. I think 1875 was one of the bigger ones, where I think children at that point had to stay in school till 12. But they did all that. After the treachery of the Blue Books was done, the first thing they did, they took all of the teachers out, stuck in English monoglot speakers who didn't speak Welsh. And all the kids then had all their lessons.
We had a class full of children who could only speak Welsh being taught by someone who could only speak English.
But
disaster.
All of this were then kept running. You know, the basic feud then kept running because they kept on trying to kill off the Welsh language. They kept on trying to kill off the Welsh language, and they could never quite get a stranglehold of it. So in the 20s, then Saunders Lewis and a couple of the other guys set up Plaid Cymru, you know, and we're coming back down to fire again. You know, there's lots of fire. Rebecca riots set fire to the countryside. I'm young enough to remember when we set second homes in Wales alight. That was
the old joke when I was growing up, wasn't it? I used to say, they're burning all the second homes when they come to Wales for was it come home for a real fire, isn't it? That was it.
Yeah, come home to a real fire. I think
come home to a real fire. That was it. It was the coalboard advert supposed to be, wasn't it?
And this is what Saunders Lewis and two other founder members of Plaid Cymru did, was that they set fire to this town inn up in North Wales in 1936, which they were charged with. Arson, I think they were charged with on that one. But again, what happened there was the town inn was, I think it was a bombing school. It was an RAF bombing school that had been. They tried to put it into two different parts of England, in Northumbria and somewhere else. And because of all the protests of the locals and the rest of it, we'll stick it in Wales. So they stuck it in Wales, and they did mind, and they set fire to it. And again, the typical thing there was they wouldn't try them in Wales. They took them to London. So they got away from trying them in Wales with a Welsh jury.
Yeah, that's
and take them to London, and all of that then come out. It come out, and so it's all part of the general protest that of trying to retain the Welsh language and Welsh culture. We go on from that. These are the.
No real surprise that Welsh history is still not on the syllabus, really, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, well, if you look at this, you ask the basic question, okay? The English in 1847 decided to go out and kill off the Welsh language. And you then ask the answer, well, did they succeed? And certainly by 100 years after them, in the 1950s, you probably argue that he did, because the number of Welsh speakers then was in in the low, like 15%, 20% at most, and gradually dying off because it was the older generation. So it was at that point, it was on its dying bed, having this last gasping breath and they were just about to nail the coffin lid down on it, along with Welsh culture. But then in 1967, you had the formation of the Welsh Language Society. Again, Saunders Lewis and all these people were involved in that. And the Welsh Language Society was one of these ploys. Plaid Cymru wanted to stay and act on the political front. And Saunders Lewis in particular always wanted to take direct action, i.e. let's burn the whole place down. You know, he seemed to have a fascination with matches, you know, wanting to burn everything down, to take direct action to get the authorities to stop and look and listen. So they formed the Welsh Language Society, which took on that role, which is then, you know, if you think 1967, that comes into the period where they were burning all the second homes. They were burning sort of monoglotte English road signs and things like that. And their activities.
The famous green paint campaign.
Yes, and all of that. And basically, in 1962, Saunders Lewis had given a radio speech entitled "The Fate of the Language," in which he predicted the total extinction of the Welsh language unless immediate action was taken. That immediate action was taken in the form of all these fire and all the disruptions and all the protests. It was not just setting fire to things. There were all kinds of direct action protests to make the matter, bring it into the public arena. And as a result of that, we got the 1967 Language Act, which then brought in the bilingual official forms and the bilingual road traffic signs. And that was then followed in 77 by Radio Cymru, and in 82 by S4C. So the culmination of all the pressure by Plaid Cymru and the Welsh Language Society brought about all of these changes. Mm-hmm. And then all of these changes kept on being applied. And finally, they had a referendum in 1997 where the Welsh voters approved the creation of a National Assembly in Wales.